Well, hello friends. We are outside in some gorgeous, we're gonna call it early or pre-fall weather. And I'm actually today gonna work in the garden and do a few changeovers or switchovers. I'm gonna take a few things out of containers, save them for the winter like I do every year, kind of show you that process of saving a lot of the plants because that's how I keep plants going year to year. I bring them in and I save them. We're gonna put out some pumpkins because I don't wanna have to water in the fall. Since I do this process every year, it kind of becomes second nature to me and I don't think about it. So this year I really wanna slow down and show you some of that process. I'll be doing that in my stories. I'll probably do some reels on it, but this video is really one that I can show you where I take plants, how I save them, because I replant them is all I do into small containers that I can easily move around. And then I'm gonna show you why I prefer pumpkins and how I get them to stack when I can. You know, I grow a lot of pumpkins. I love to use them in different areas. And I don't want to plant fall annuals because it can be dry here in the fall, like right now. And why have to go around and water things when you can just look at beautiful color through nature's pumpkins? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get started, do a few of these things, and hopefully maybe get you in the mood for, dare I say, a new season. Let's not like it. Let's look forward to a new season. So we're out at the beginning of my driveway and you can see the houses behind. My French Bulldog Kip is right there watching me. And we're in this flower bed that I love because it's full of pollinator loving plants, a lot of perennials that take care of themselves. But right here I have urns that I recently showed in a quick late season garden tour. And what I'm gonna do is take this one apart. I'm gonna save the pencil cactus. The annuals, sometimes I save cuttings of this purple heart and we'll get some cuttings started for next year, but otherwise I'm gonna start separating it and take it apart. So to start, what I wanna do is obviously have something sharp. So I'm gonna use a knife when I need it, but usually what I first do is go in and pry out some of these annuals so I can get to that center plant easier. Now, these are small urns and I definitely, I mean definitely overfill them. And I do that on purpose just because I like them to be full. So when I take out some of these annuals, and like I said, I might save some of these cuttings, I also want to note that I have a succulent in here. I think this is called like dolphin, string of dolphins maybe or something, because it has a beautiful, they kind of look like little miniature dolphins that are coming out of the water. It's really pretty, but I will pot that one up too. But I'm just going to go in and take all these annuals around so I can expose this pencil cactus right in the middle. Now, these can be toxic to animals. My dog doesn't actually care about them, nothing does, but that's at my house. But I do keep them up and away just in case, and then they just go into plant storage over the winter, away from home here, over in a little building on the farm. So I'll just go through, take all of these out, and expose the center. So you can see here now, all I have left is that center pencil cactus with a little bit of the lemon coral sedum. You know, sometimes I just leave that right with a plant like this when I take it out, because a lot of times that can actually start growing in the pot over the winter, which is fine with me. So a big sharp knife really helps do this because it allows me to just cut around the roots. Now, obviously these roots get pretty vigorous. They love this spot. You can see they're getting fiery red, putting on new growth. So I like to go in with my knife and just at an angle, start making cuts all the way around the plant. Now this is gonna allow me to, one, I'm going to be cutting those roots. I'm going to be, shall we say, pruning the roots. And that allows me to keep it at a certain size too, so it's easier to manage when I bring it in and out, plant it for the summer, and then plant it and pot it up for the winter. It kind of works either way. So all I need to do is keep working my knife in, and as I can, notice I'm wearing gloves too, protection. For one, sometimes the sap of these can irritate some people's skin. I haven't found it to irritate mine, but you never know. So you can see now I can easily take this out. A lot of roots are just as attached to it. Easy for me to manage. I'm just gonna set it aside, but then we'll make this really fall. Once I have something like this empty, I want to assess what I want to put in it. Now, in this one, what I'm going to do is stack some pumpkins. So I first need something that's going to allow, hopefully, the pumpkin not to sit on the soil, because you don't want moisture against a pumpkin at all times in the fall. Even with cooler weather, that can cause some rot. But I also want something that will just finish it off and make this urn kind of have a clean edge. So I'll go over to my gator here and we'll see what I'm working with. I always keep various sizes of grapevine wreaths. That's what I put underneath any pumpkin. It helps level out irregular sized and shaped pumpkins so they can fit on top easier. but it also just cleans it up. So I'll start with seeing what sizes work, and then you can see I've already mapped out what pumpkins, larger ones, I want to use. These dumplings we're going to use a little bit later. So I first always bring over my grapevine wreaths and I see which one's going to fit on it. Now you can go with a smaller one if you want to hide the wreath and just want something to even out and give you, a wreath allows a little bit of give, so you can mess with the pumpkin, make sure it sits flat. I like to go with a slightly larger wreath that sits on the container itself, and you can see it just cleans up the container and gives the beginning to it. Now you could put another wreath inside of it if your soil's really close. I have enough space that it's not going to be touching the soil, so I'm not worried. But that's when I start with my first pumpkin. So usually the largest one, obviously, and I start placing it. Now see how a little bit of give will actually allow, this has a cap on the bottom, a Turk's turban, and that cap would not sit level. So now with this first wreath, it sits level, which is really nice. The next one I'm using is what the street term is a peanut pumpkin. But what I like about them is, see all the sugars make these nodules on them, but I really like the color too. So I'm using ornamental and heirloom squash here, meaning they all can be actually eaten too. But what's great is they have such unique colors, and I like to mix those colors. Now, from the camera point of view, you probably can't tell, but this is slightly smaller. But I just like a big dramatic stack. Now, the important thing is, yes, I do live in full elements. I have a lot of wind here. I have never had a pumpkin stack fall over yet. And that's in quite a few years. I've been living here 13 years, been stacking pumpkins ever since. And it doesn't really ever fall over. Now, the one thing that's important to start with is a solid base, and that's gonna make sure that this is sturdy, because if your first one is wonky, the whole stack will get off. And then all I do, there's no secret to this at all. I will just sit and I will turn a squash or pumpkin until I feel like it's flat. And sometimes I'll have to switch out for a different one. I don't attach them to each other. You don't want to make holes in them, that will make them rot. The only thing I will do is if I need to, I'll trim the stem so they can sit on top of each other without hitting. Next, we're gonna put a smaller one on top, which for some reason out here, these are two matching urns, by the way. I have one on each side, and so I need them to match. And I put 4 on the other side, so I'm gonna do 4 here too for a really tall, dramatic stack. I'm gonna finish with a white one on top. Now, this might be so big, you're not even gonna see it, so I'm gonna have to show you when I take the camera back. What you wanna check when you're stacking these is that it never feels like it's starting to lean. That's gonna cause it to want to fall. But these are kind of heavy on their own since they're so large, so there really isn't usually an issue where they're moving, which is great. This one is honestly done, and do you see how simple it is? I don't have to water it, I don't have to plant it, I don't have to fertilize it. That was all done when it was growing, but now we can just enjoy. So now you can see how beautiful it is. Now, obviously not everyone's into a pumpkin stack. Don't worry about it. I just enjoy them. Put one big pumpkin if you want to, or put no pumpkins. What I like is when I back up here, I'm gonna back all the way up across the driveway because there's 2 of these stacks, and I want you to see them both. So even from the road or from me, look, we have 2 stacks that match, and it's just really fun, and it's really simple. At night, there is a landscape light, a low voltage light that does illuminate them just ever so. I just really enjoy this. But we're gonna go now work on these little dumpling ones. If you saw my reel recently, you saw how I'm gonna use these, but you can make a dramatic presentation even with all these small ones. I'm now across the driveway from my kitchen window. I always call this my grandma's flower bed, only because there was a flower bed here when I moved in that grandma had always had. I changed the shape of it and extended it. But this is something I see from my kitchen window, so it always matters to me that I put a little bit of effort and time in over here. And what I'm doing this year is using an excess of dumpling. They're not gourds, they're a squash actually that you can eat, but they look like gourds. What I love about them is they're a really bright color. Now, these are really tall trellises, they're 6 foot tall. So on a smaller trellis, this really wouldn't take that many. What I find with these is it takes, which it depends on the size, but like, I don't know, 40 to 50 of these small dumpling gourd looking squash to fill these, but I have to make sure I can get my trellis ready so they don't just fall out. Now, these trellis I keep in year round. So I put lights on them at Christmas so they look like topiary trees. I had a mandevilla growing on all of them over the summer, so they were just nice and full of growth. And now I'm gonna put pumpkins in them, or squash. Why not? So I wanted to show you, I did a reel on this and it was a really fun, just kind of like short reel, but I wanna show you the process more and explain it, because this can be mimicked very easily for any size trellis topiary like this. With a small amount of squash, you could even just stack some pumpkins in it and put it over it just kind of as a form so they never move or something too if you want to. just to give a depiction of what they're gonna look like, it's like these two over here. I have a third one that I'm now gonna work on. And it's pretty simple, same idea with grapevine wreath, but you can see the topiary is holding in all of those dumplings. So what I wanna do though, if you go up to it, what you're gonna notice, let me grab actually one of the dumplings so you can see here for yourself, is they're very small, but they just would fall out. See how they just go through that wire and they just fall out. So what I'm doing is taking a thin gauge wire that I can wrap around, and you can see I'm gonna go in a crosshatch. So I first go up and down around one way, and then I cross back the other way to make an X. And that X is enough to hold the biggest dumplings down at the bottom in, and then successfully get smaller as they go up. So what I'm doing is just taking my wire, it's just right here. I can unroll it as I'm going. I pull it tight when I go around an edge. It's all on one as I'm doing this after I start it. And then I come up here around the corner, and I make sure it's all the way up here in the corner, and I pull it as tight as I can. It's not perfectly tight, but what this allows is so it keeps nice tension, and then I unroll it going down, and I lift this trellis. This trellis just can come out of here and go around the bottom. And now I'm at a spot where I'm going to need to go back now the other way. So here at the bottom, all I do is if I need to go and now make my other cross, I'll just unroll it as I need over to here and start going now back opposite way. And that just allows me to make this cross that's gonna hold in all these pumpkins. Now, this is the first year I've done this. It was just an idea I had, and I actually really do like it. I'll probably keep these wires on it. So if I wanna do it next year, they eventually could rust. It's not a galvanized wire, but it could rust next year. I mean, it'd take more than a year, I think, but in a few years it could rust and you'd have to redo it. But really what's nice about this is this would allow even more space, depending what vine you put on here in the summer for an annual, to grow, to be able to grow all over, not just on these edges, because it's really big openings. These are probably close to a foot wide here, so you really don't need it that big. So now when I make that X, I'll do it 2 levels up, and then I'll just start filling it with pumpkins. When I get to the end, I just make a cut. A lot of secateurs, you should check yours. See that little notch in the back of these at the back of the blade right there? That's for a wire cutter. So you can take it all the way back and just cut like that. And then I can just go and take this around and just make sure it's secure. It's nothing fancy and it's nothing perfect. What this allows me to do is just have an end point. And now everything has their cross hatchet in them and will hold in the small ones perfectly. Now that everything's done, all I'm gonna do is have a little space in the middle that I can fill up. So you could fill this up completely if you want to, but what I did was, since this is so easy to remove and just set behind you, is I just take some plastic containers, if I have a stack of them, from plantings. These are 1 gallon size, but you could use whatever. And that just gives you a little bit of space eaten up by something cheap, free, that will just last, and then I'll save these again. I save tons of these so I can plant plants in them. And then what I'll often do, just to make sure nothing's gonna touch the soil, is put a small grapevine wreath, and you could see what size fits. But then once we put the trellis back on, you'll see that this is just gonna keep them from hitting the bottom as easily, and that's more what I want. I just don't want them to sit on the bottom, really, because I think that just kind of, I like to line it up so it's straight too. But then once I get this put in here, you can see now it's just a nice solid base. Now I also just like to dress up, this looks a little unflattering. We could never have an unflattering pumpkin display, friends. That just isn't allowed. So I take a larger grapevine wreath, which any craft store, these are pretty reasonable, and I save them year to year. So far I've had most of mine, I don't know, 10 years, and they have yet to wear out. Some of them are getting a little ragged, but you can see now it's cleaned up perfectly, and I can just start putting them in. So at first I use the largest ones I have, as long as I can find whatever biggest ones there are. I find a really small one if I can. I'll just go through my pile that fits the highest up point. You can never fit the exact tip because it goes down to really small. But then I'll start putting them in here in the holes and kind of just finagling them until they fit in. So you can see here at the edge, just so you can see how I kind of had to turn that sideways to fit it in. That way, once it's in here, it just sits outright, but it could never fall out. And that's what matters. Now, obviously the ones down at the bottom are never going to fall out, but as you get up higher, putting them in at a sideways angle and then flattening them out means they can't fall out. So I just keep going around and around until it's all filled up. Now you're gonna think, oh, that's a lot of work. I timed my other one and it took me around 35 minutes, even putting the wire on. For a pumpkin display that I'm gonna enjoy for well over a month, I find that well worth it. As you get towards the top, the only hard part is just making sure then you have ones that keep fitting through whatever trellis you're using. Now, if you're using a shorter trellis, like I said, this is 6 foot once it's even set in the ground. So it's as tall or a little shorter than I am. I'm 6'1" or 6'2", but what you want it, like if you had a really small one, all you would have to do is turn it upside down, fill it. If you need to put wires on it, do that. And if it's small enough, you could just turn it over and set it in your pot for you. Now, this gets really heavy and it's too tall and cumbersome. I can't do that. So I just keep looking for ones that will fit through, but then once they're turned sideways, don't fall out. So that's the only part as you get towards the top that you need to make sure you can keep doing. And then what I do, this is gonna sound so stupid. When I explain something like this, it makes me sound like I'm crazy. I'm not. I just love seasonal decor, but I also just love making my outdoors a place that inspires me and excites me. So what you want to start doing here as you get towards the top is you'll have to hold a few up and jam kind of 1 or 2 in. You see I have the smallest one kind of jammed up there at the moment, just holding. I think that's the smallest one I can find. This one actually might be slightly smaller, so I might see if I can fit this one. Let's see here. Ooh, that one is a little smaller. So then you just start seeing what you can jam and what will fit where. So then I start laying down the ones I know I'm gonna be able to fit around, and I just keep placing them in as they fit. So as stupid as this sounds, it actually is not hard. It just takes a little bit of finagling, and you know you're eventually just gonna make it work. So here's the finished one, and now the 3 all match. And you can see there's a little bit, like about a foot of space at the top of them. It gets too small, so you can't put anything up there. But from a distance, that really kind of recedes, and all you see is the orange. And do you notice how look back here, I'm probably what, 15 foot away? You don't see any of that wire crosshatch we did, only when you get up to it. And that's what I love about it. It holds them in, they can't fall out. But look how fun, this is what I think is great. So maybe you grew pumpkins, maybe you have a ton of miniature pumpkins, whether it's the Jill B. Little, the Jack B. Little, those little Casper white ones, Casperitas. Well, this is something you could do with them to make a huge impact. Obviously you can put them just in mass in a big bowl, but this is a way to get an upright, kind of dramatic, beautiful, like just statement without, too much work, just a little bit of creativity. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna run over to my mom's, pull out a couple agave I'm gonna save, plant a pumpkin, we're not gonna plant it, but we're gonna put a pumpkin in the containers instead. And then I'm gonna show how I pot up some of these plants that I save, what I do with them, how I make sure there aren't bugs for the ones you actually bring in the house, that's a big one, and just kind of how I care for them over the winter. So we're over at my mom's house now. It's right across the road from my house if you didn't know. And I'm working on the east lawn, which this is going all the way down to the orchard. So the orchard is back there. There's lots of apples I need to pick right now. But what I'm doing instead is this pumpkins. Now, one reason I start taking these out early, start taking the agave out, is because I have so many to do that this allows me to do it slowly over time. So right before we're gonna have a hard freeze sometime in October, I'm not scrambling around trying to grab all my plants in. And also it helps them get acclimated outdoors in their new containers before I put them into the plant room. Now these agave are all pups off a massive one I have. But I have 3 of these repeating beds going down to the orchard, and they have a nice agave in them. They have the Heliochrysum around them. It's done well all summer. And now I'm going to do the same kind of process where I take them out, get them ready, and then we'll go plant them. But I am gonna place a pumpkin in these too. Gloves again, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to wear more protection. These are prickly. They have prickles on their ends. Now what I try to do is go in again with my knife and kind of see what I can get out. Now if we end up hurting one of these leaves on it, that's okay. But the thing is, I always usually have to cut some of them anyway after winter because they get a little haggard. So I really don't worry too much, but I try it first just to get out this Heliochrysum, just so I can see what I'm doing. Now, do you notice when I planted these, I said, I do Heliochrysum because it can take some pretty good dry weather, and it does. Like these have been watered, during dry conditions, they might've been watered about once a week, but they still did well. So as I expose that soil, I'll just go in with my knife and again make that angled cut so I can go in and just lift out the agave. Once I get done, you can see it's pretty easy just to lift out of here. Now, in a little bit when I repot these, I'm gonna talk about, look at all this new growth that's coming. Massive amount of roots, trying to make tons of pups. But this really, what I like about agave, they can really easily take a root pruning and can use small roots and still do really well. So I'm gonna put this in the back of the gator so we can go plant it, then we'll put a pumpkin in here. As I go to place a pumpkin in here, pretty much the same concept. I leave the soil but don't want the pumpkin to touch the soil. Now this urn and another urn are ones I use at Christmas to put Christmas trees in up in the house, but until then they stay out here so I can use them for fall. Now what I do, you can see here, I have one that fits right around the rim like I like, but the problem is it still is pretty deep in here. Just to put one pumpkin, it would just set right there. So then I take a smaller wreath. So you can see we have just a normal grapevine. Then this one is more of a spray grapevine, but with a smaller center. So I use that upside down, or sometimes I even put it on top of this other one. And then that creates a space that that pumpkin can sit on, and it lifts it just slightly. So I'll check if I want to do it upside down or right side up, I'm not sure yet. But as you put the pumpkin here, you see how it pushes it down, but it also keeps it above, so you still see the pumpkin. And that to me is what's important. I want to see that pumpkin so it lifts it just enough. This is where it's one of those things where you don't need tons to make a display. One pumpkin that's generously sized, I think this is the Goosebumps variety. I'd have to look for sure, but that's why you have these nice bumps on here. They're goosebumps. And so I just love how simple it is by itself in this. Now what I have done other years is sometimes I'll get dried corn husks and I'll tuck them around the pumpkin, lifting it, but also kind of giving it a halo kind of wreath effect. It just depends. You could also pile this high with flint corn, the multicolored corn. But I'm gonna go do another one here yet before we go home and start repotting. I'm at the back of my shed now, just starting to put all the plants together. I've started potting them up. So what I do for winter on a lot of these is I repot them and I just put them in plastic containers like this that I save from shrubs, small trees, whatever it is. And then I keep them year to year. And what I do is I just pot them in it. Now what I like to first try to do, if I can, is go around and clean them up. So I will cut off any bad leaves that are on there. I will also remove these pups, mostly because they suck energy. And over the winter, you know, they're kind of going dormant, honestly, over the winter. And just to kind of make them so they don't have to try to grow a whole nother agave on them, I'll take sometimes over here, I have a knife here. And I know you're gonna say, oh, this looks like it's really just rough on it. It really isn't. And honestly, all these little pups, they can be saved. So even though it doesn't even look like there's many roots with that, I can actually just pot that up and it will live. And that's how all these have come to be. I started with one big plant, saved all the pups every year, and only a few years later, look what I have. So these are then what I start planting. Now, when I'm going to plant these, since they're in small containers, I use all-purpose potting soil. So this is what I use in the spring also, and I don't just throw it out in the spring, but I use, you know, I love Espoma all-purpose potting soil because even for things like these agave for cactus, it drains well, it has good nutrients in it, it has good organic matter in it, and it works really well for these. It's lightweight enough that it's easy for me to move, it's easy for them to drain through when I water them, and it just works beautifully, and it's so easy to use. What I like to do is have a big container that I dump the soil into because that catches it. That way I'm not wasting it. So I will put my container right in it, right on top of some soil. Then I'll take my big bag of soil and I will just fill it up somewhat. Now, if you want to, and you're working with really large containers, you could try to fill them halfway up with just an all natural hardwood mulch. That, you know, we're not gonna grow them in here. Over the winter, they're gonna be somewhat dormant. So it doesn't matter if it's not fully just full of soil. What I'm gonna do though is work on this cactus here, and you can see it has a small root ball. So I check, obviously there's too much soil in there. So first what I'll do is take out some of the soil. And I like to do it just at the right level. And then I set it back in. Now that's just about perfect. Now see, this is why I have a big container around it. Instead of losing all the soil on my gravel or on grass, because soil costs money, I put it right in here And then I just start tamping it around. And you can see we're just potting it like we would anything else. Once I have it all potted up, you can see I just place them back here. Now this is my rough and tumble back shed, okay? Only friends see back here, but your friends. Now this is already the one I did the other day. I said I had 2. Now what I do is I leave them here for a few weeks. I water them and I let them just acclimate in these new containers before I set them indoors. You never know for sure when we're gonna get our first hard freeze in Iowa. It can range anywhere from, I wanna say it's like the 2nd week of October to the 3rd week, sometimes later, sometimes earlier. But our average frost date is mid-October. And that's when all the plants need to be in by. If you're gonna get a hard freeze, none of these tropicals usually like it. Some of the agave can take cold weather, but you don't wanna chance it. So I like to acclimate them for a few weeks beforehand, water them, keep them going, give them some sun, so they can kind of settle into these containers, then take them indoors. So what I'll do is I'll also probably plant up a few of the small pups. I'm saving a little few of the succulents, and then we're just gonna wrap up. Now that I have all these going, I like to just finish up with some of these succulents. So these are those, I think string of whales, I don't remember, and then a couple little agave pups from another day when I was doing this. Now, I do it on a smaller scale in here where I have the all-purpose potting soil. I use small, just quart-size containers from perennials probably that I planted. So the same process, and this is how I save a lot of plants, honestly, and you can actually year to year then, I will save a lot of succulents and put them back in containers next year. They continue to grow larger, so this is what I do with like my burro's tail, a lot of string of pearls I'll do this with. You can also just take cuttings from some of these plants if you want to, but I find if I can dig up some of the roots like this, they do really well. So I'm not necessarily even that careful. I'm pretty rough with them. Sometimes if I have extra pieces, I'll just put them into that soil, kind of like dry rooting them with a cutting. And then you can see pretty quickly, I have a plant that can go into my plant room. And again, these two I will just leave out for a while. Now the ones when I have agave pups, you fill it with soil, pretty full, because remember, water always displaces it. And then I make a little hole in the center, and then I'll take the cutting, which this is a pup, so this is one I pulled off, and it looks a little floppy right now, but it even has a root on it right here. I will just put this right into the soil, push it around it, put a little bit more so you can make sure you can tamp it in tightly, and then that's all you need to do. So many of these agave, it's so easy to have more and more of them. These are great things to give as gifts if you want to. Pot them up now. By Christmas, they'll be rooted in, they'll be growing. This one has quite a few roots on it too, you can see. So you just make a hole down in there, put those roots in the hole. And this is such a fun gift to me to be able to give friends, even when they come over. Like if I'm having kind of a party or a garden party, even outdoors, and I have extra of these and someone comments on them, I'll just go over, grab one from the table and say, hey, take it home, because why not? You can see it really is pretty easy to save plants year to year. This is the same process now I'll be going through for quite a few days in the upcoming month as I start taking the plants out of containers that I save, bringing them indoors. Obviously, some of them I just keep in small containers and bring them in and out as they are. So it just depends on the size of the plant. But the ones that are in big containers that are too heavy or aren't ones you bring indoors, those are ones I do kind of this thing too, and right over here with the pencil cactus. So I hope you're maybe a little inspired for a new season, saw some pumpkin maybe inspiration, maybe something you can apply to yourself, because you can do small stacks of pumpkins, you could do a small topiary of those small pumpkins and really make it work for any yard. You know, it's fun to experiment with different things, it's fun to try different things, not always go with the usual suspect, and kind of branch out and get excited. That's what to me keeps me going and keeps me inspired, is trying something new and creating something new especially. So hope you're equally excited as we go into the fall season. Gardening's gonna change, but we're gonna all in this together, and so I'll take you along the way as I prepare my garden for the upcoming winter, really as I start slowing down, and that's kind of the fun part too. It's a changing season, but that means we can change with it. So hope you're having fun gardening.